Chapter 1. The Fallen Warrior and the Scavenger. The Graveyard of War. The planet Draxus V was a forgotten battlefield, a world where two mighty empires had waged war and left nothing but ruin behind. The once thriving planet had been bombarded, burned, and abandoned, leaving behind nothing but the bones of war-wrecked starships, fallen mechs, shattered armor, and the scattered remnants of the countless dead. For 5 years, Elias Cade had lived among the wreckage, a ghost among ruins. A former Terran Union engineer, he had deserted after realizing the war between the Galactic Imperium and the Valari Dominion was nothing but a cycle of destruction. He had no loyalty, no cause, only survival. His life was simple: scavenge, fix, trade, until the day he found her. The Broken Warrior. Elias was knee-deep in wreckage, prying open the rusted hull of a Valari drop pod, hoping to salvage any working power cells when he heard it. A faint, ragged breath. He froze, his fingers tightening around his tool. There shouldn't be anyone alive out here. Slowly, he turned. The drop pod had crashed violently, embedding itself halfway into the rubble. The Valari bioarmor inside was shattered, its once sleek black metal plating cracked, its energy core completely dark, and inside the broken armor was a woman. She was dying. Her silver-white hair was matted with blood and dust, her golden eyes dim, her breathing shallow. She had the unmistakable features of a Valari warrior, tall, powerful, and undeniably lethal, even in this weakened state. Her eyes snapped to him, and with a weak, yet defiant snarl, she tried to reach for a weapon she didn't have. "Stay back, human," she rasped, voice thick with pain and exhaustion. Elias raised his hands. "Easy. I'm not with the Imperium." She glared at him, suspicious even in the face of death. Then, "What are you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Elias exhaled. "Just a scavenger." Her gaze flickered to his gear, to the Terran patches still stitched to his jacket, and she grimaced. "Then you are lower than a soldier," she muttered. Elias let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, something like that." He crouched down beside her, carefully assessing the damage to her armor. The Valari exosuits were legendary, a fusion of organic metal and Neuralink technology, making their warriors near invincible in battle. But hers was ruined fractured plates, burned-out circuits, and a dead power core. Without it, she was just as fragile as anyone else. She must have seen the calculation in his eyes, because she let out a tired breath. "My suit is broken," she admitted. "I will not survive without it." Elias knew she was right. The atmosphere of Draxus V was still contaminated from the war, its harsh conditions slowly poisoning anything that lingered here too long. "Then we need to fix it," Elias muttered. She let out a bitter chuckle. "A Terran repairing a Valari battle armor? Impossible." Elias gave her a cocky smirk. "Lady, I've fixed things a hell of a lot worse." He pulled out his multi-tool, pried open the damaged plating, and began the impossible. A race against time. Elias worked for hours, scavenging usable components from the wreckage around them. The Valari armor was unlike anything he had worked on before. It wasn't just metal and circuitry, it was alive. Its bio-organic systems fused to its wearer, and every time he adjusted something, the armor reacted. The metal twitched, as if sensing a foreign touch. Some parts tried to repair themselves, but the damage was too extensive. He needed a replacement power source. But Draxus V's wreckage fields were dangerous, full of active Imperial war drones and scavenger raiders who would kill for scraps. Elias turned to the Valari woman, her breathing still weak. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then muttered, "Alria." "Elias," he introduced himself, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Listen, Alria, I need a power core to get your armor running again." She struggled to sit up, pain lancing through her body. "Then we must move. Before my body fails me." Elias frowned. "You can barely stand." Her golden eyes burned with defiance. "Then I will crawl." Elias exhaled. "Stubborn as hell." "Fine," he said. "But if you fall, I'm carrying you." Her glare could have melted steel. The search for power. The wreckage field was a maze of twisted metal, with war machines long dead and forgotten, their cores still smoldering with residual energy. Elias and Alria moved carefully, her weak, but determined, and him watching every shadow for threats. Then he saw it. A downed Valari command ship, its reactor still humming faintly. If there was a working power core anywhere, it would be there. Elias gestured. Bingo. But Aurea froze, her expression darkening. We are not alone, she whispered. Elias followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped, because standing in front of the wreckage were two Imperial scavengers, their armor marked with the insignia of warlords who thrived off the ruins of conflict, and they had already spotted them. Well, one of them sneered. What do we have here? The second one grinned. A broken Valari? That armor's worth a fortune. Elias cursed under his breath. He had no weapons, and Aurea was too weak to fight. If they wanted to live, they had only one option. Run. Chapter 2. Fighting without armor. Nowhere to run. Elias and Aurea stood frozen as the two Imperial scavengers blocked their only path forward. The scavengers were armed and well-fed, their battered armor adorned with trophies from fallen warriors' dented Valari plating, broken Terran insignias, and the occasional bone tied to a belt loop. They weren't just here to scavenge. They were here to hunt. Well, the first scavenger sneered, his plasma rifle casually slung over one shoulder. A wounded Valari and some Junkrat human? Looks like our lucky day. The second scavenger grinned, stepping forward with a cruel smirk. That armor's useless, isn't it? He nodded at Aurea's shattered biosuit. Sell her off or kill her now? Aurea tensed beside Elias, her golden eyes narrowing, but her body was too weak to react fast enough. Elias could see it, her stance was shaky, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Even if she tried to fight, she wouldn't last long. And Elias? He had no weapons. That left him one option. He had to bluff. Elias smirked, stepping forward slightly. You really want to do this? He asked, tilting his head. Two Terran soldiers are right behind us, and they're looking for blood. The scavengers paused, exchanging glances. Terran soldiers? The first one asked. Yeah, Elias said smoothly, lying through his teeth. They got dropped from orbit yesterday. Been picking off anyone stupid enough to wander alone? The second scavenger frowned, shifting his grip on his weapon. That true? Elias shrugged. You want to stick around and find out? The scavengers hesitated long enough. Aurea moved first. Even weakened, her Valari instincts were deadly. She lunged at the nearest enemy, grabbing him by the wrist and twisting his rifle aside, forcing a misfire. The plasma bolt hissed past Elias' face, searing into a pile of wreckage. Elias didn't hesitate. He threw himself forward, slamming his shoulder into the second scavenger's gut, knocking the man back. The first scavenger regained control, swinging his weapon around, but Aurea was faster. With a quick, brutal movement, she drove her knee into his ribs, then grabbed his knife from his belt and jammed it straight into his throat. The second scavenger panicked, scrambling to grab his rifle. Elias grabbed a chunk of broken ship plating and swung it like a club. The impact cracked the man's helmet, sending him crashing into the dirt. Elias barely had time to catch his breath before he yanked the rifle away from the unconscious scavenger. Aurea staggered, clutching her side. Her breathing labored. Are you okay? Elias asked, gripping the rifle tightly. Aurea wiped blood from her lips, then gave him a sharp nod. They were unworthy, she muttered. Sloppy. Untrained. Elias raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Well, sloppy almost killed us. Aurea exhaled, her legs shaking from the effort. Elias sighed. They couldn't keep this up. They needed to find that power core fast. The wreckage of a fallen warship. Elias and Aurea made it to the downed Valari command ship, its skeletal remains half buried beneath the rubble of war. Smoke still lingered, curling from shattered engines, and Elias could smell burned metal and charred wiring. Stay here, he told Aurea, crouching low. I'll check if there's anything still active. She gritted her teeth, but didn't argue. Her body was too weak to fight again so soon. Elias climbed into the wreckage, moving past twisted corridors and shattered consoles. Then he found it. A functional power core, still humming faintly beneath the ship's collapsed engine room. Elias' heart raced. If he could pull it free. A warning beep filled the air. His stomach dropped. The core was rigged with an explosive charge. Of course it is, Elias muttered. It was a military failsafe designed to detonate if scavengers tried to steal it. Elias took a deep breath, wiping sweat from his brow. He had one chance to disarm it. If he failed, they were both dead. A gamble with death. Elias crouched over the live explosive, pulling out his toolkit. Aurea stood at the entrance, her golden eyes flicking between him and the power core. "Do you know what you're doing?" Elias smirked. "Nope." She let out a frustrated sigh. But Elias wasn't lying. This wasn't human tech. The Volari failsafe was unlike anything he had worked on before. Still, it followed patterns. Circuits. Wires. Triggers. If he could just isolate the detonation relay, he could— The bomb beeped louder. "Okay, bad idea," Elias muttered, pulling his hands back. Aurea's fingers curled into fists. "If you set it off, Dash." I know. Elias interrupted. He had to think differently. He wasn't just disarming a bomb. He was fixing broken technology. And then it hit him. The Volari bioarmor was designed to repair itself, right? What if he tricked the core into thinking it was still inside a functioning war machine? Elias flipped open a secondary panel, rerouted the remaining energy, and patched the control line directly into the armor's neural interface. The bomb stopped beeping. The power core came alive. Aurea's eyes widened. "You actually did it." Elias exhaled hard, adrenaline still pounding in his veins. "Yeah," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Let's get the hell out of here before something else explodes." Reforging the armor. Back at their makeshift shelter, Elias worked through the night, reconnecting the power core to Aurea's shattered bioarmor. The metal twitched and pulsed as the system slowly awakened, like a beast breathing for the first time after a long hibernation. Aurea watched in silence, her expression unreadable. Finally, the armor sealed around her once more, its energy returning, its plating reforging itself with a brilliant blue glow. She flexed her hands, rolling her shoulders. Power surged through her body. Elias let out a tired chuckle. "Well, does it work?" Aurea looked down at him, stepping forward. The way she moved was different now, graceful, powerful, like a warrior reborn. Then, without warning, she dropped to one knee. Elias blinked. What are you doing?" Aurea placed one fist over her chest, bowing her head slightly. "In Volari culture," she murmured, "a warrior bows only to those who have saved their life." Elias stared at her. "You saved mine," she continued, "and in return, my life is now yours to command." And just like that, the scavenger became the master of a Volari warrior. And the war was far from over. Chapter 3. A Warrior's Oath. The weight of a life debt. Elias sat on a rusted piece of Volari hull plating, arms crossed as he tried to process what had just happened. In front of him, Aurea knelt, one fist over her chest, her golden eyes burning with unshakable conviction. "You saved my life," she repeated. "By our laws, I am bound to serve you." Elias let out a disbelieving laugh, rubbing his forehead. "You're serious, aren't you?" Aurea tilted her head slightly, as if confused by his hesitation. "A warrior does not break their oath." Elias sighed. He had heard about Volari warrior culture during his time in the war, but he never expected to be on the receiving end of it. "You really don't have to do this," he muttered. "You can go back to your people. Find a Volari command ship. Get off this rock." She shook her head. "The ones who abandoned me here are not my people." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Aurea hesitated. For the first time, her gaze shifted downward, her fingers tightening into fists. "I was shot down," she admitted, "but not by Imperials." Elias' stomach dropped. "Wait, you're saying your own people shot you down?" Aurea exhaled slowly, standing. "Not my people. Traitors. Volari who seek power above honor." Elias cursed under his breath. This wasn't just some random skirmish, there was something much bigger happening. "Do you know who they were?" he asked. Aurea's golden eyes hardened. "No, but I intend to find out." She turned back to him, her expression fierce and determined. "You are my charge now, Elias Cade," she declared. "Until my life debt is repaid, I will fight by your side." Elias sighed again, shaking his head. "I feel like I just got drafted into a war I wanted nothing to do with." Aurea smirked slightly. "Then you are finally seeing the world as it is." A signal in the dark. If Auria's story was true, that meant there were Valari traders operating in secret, manipulating the war for their own purposes. And that meant Elias and Auria had a new problem. They needed a way off Draxus V. Their makeshift shelter was deep within the wreckage fields, hidden well enough that Imperial scavengers wouldn't stumble upon them easily. Elias crouched over a broken communications relay, trying to piece it together from scavenged parts. "We need to find out if there are still Valari ships in orbit," he muttered. "If they don't know you're alive, that gives us an advantage." Auria sat nearby, sharpening a blade she had taken from one of the scavengers they killed. "Do you trust the Valari fleet?" Elias asked her. She hesitated. "I trust my commander," she said finally. "But if the traitors are among them, I cannot trust all." Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, figures." He flipped a switch, and the relay crackled to life. Static filled the air. Then, a voice. A distorted transmission cut through the interference, but Elias and Auria could make out 3 words. Hunting. Survivors. Execute. Elias and Auria exchanged a glance. Someone was searching for them, and they didn't want survivors. The hunt begins. Elias and Auria didn't wait around to see who was coming. "We need to move," Elias said, shouldering a scavenged rifle. Auria's bioarmor pulsed faintly, reacting to her movements as she tested its restored systems. "It functions well," she murmured, flexing her fingers. "But the power core is not at full strength. We must avoid prolonged combat." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You saying you can't win a fight?" Auria smirked. "I am saying I prefer to kill efficiently, not waste effort." Elias chuckled. "Fair enough." They moved through the wreckage, keeping low, avoiding the open fields of rusted ship debris. Then, a shadow moved in the distance. Auria stopped instantly, her posture tense. Elias followed her gaze, raising his rifle. A group of Imperial war drones patrolled the wreckage, their optical sensors sweeping the landscape, their weapons primed to fire. "They are searching for something," Auria whispered. Elias swallowed. "Let's hope it's not us." But then, one of the drones stopped, turned, and its red optics locked onto them. "Target acquired," a mechanical voice announced. Elias cursed. "Run." Fighting together. The war drones opened fire, plasma bolts ripping through the air as Elias and Auria dove for cover behind a fallen piece of ship plating. Auria moved fast, her bioarmor reacting instinctively as she rolled into position, raising her energy blade. Elias returned fire, his scavenged rifle barely denting the drone's armor. "These things are armored as hell," he shouted. Auria gritted her teeth. "Then I will break them." Before Elias could stop her, she moved fast. She darted from cover, closing the distance between her and the nearest drone in seconds. The drone adjusted its aim, but it was too slow. Auria slashed through it in a single stroke, her blade carving through the machine's metal chassis like paper. The drone collapsed in sparks and flames. Elias stared. "Damn," he muttered. Another drone locked onto them, charging up a heavy plasma cannon. "Cover me," Auria ordered. Elias didn't argue. He fired at the drone's optics, blinding it for just a second, enough time for Auria to leap into the air and bring her blade down, severing its weapon arm. The drone collapsed, twitching, and Auria finished it with a final stab. Silence followed. Only the burning remains of the drones remained. Elias let out a shaky breath. "You're terrifying, you know that?" Auria smirked slightly. "And yet, you stand beside me." Elias chuckled. "Lucky me." But before they could recover, the relay in Elias' hand crackled again. This time, a new voice spoke. "To all units, the Valari warrior is still alive. Bring her in, dead or alive." Elias stiffened. They weren't just being hunted. Someone knew Auria survived, and they were coming for her. Chapter 4, The Final Battle. The war-torn landscape of Draxus V stretched endlessly in every direction, a graveyard of forgotten battles and shattered legacies. The rusted hulks of fallen starships lay scattered across the wasteland, their twisted metal remains groaning in protest against the weight of time. Smoke still curled from old wreckage, and the air carried the lingering scent of scorched metal and decayed technology. In this forsaken place, the remnants of a war long abandoned by the great galactic powers still simmered, waiting for the right spark to ignite it once more. Tonight, that spark had arrived. Atop the skeletal remains of a Valari command vessel, Elias Cade crouched beside Aurea Vale, his pulse hammering in his ears as they surveyed the approaching force below. A mercenary strike team had come for them. Not Imperial forces, not mere scavengers, but Valari warriors, traitors to their own kind. Soldiers who had traded their honor for wealth and power. These were the same people who had betrayed Aurea, the same ones who had shot her down and left her for dead. And now, they had come to finish what they had started. Aurea's golden eyes burned with quiet rage, her grip tightening around the hilt of her plasma blade. Her bioarmor pulsed faintly, the repairs Elias had made keeping it functional, though it was still far from its full strength. The power reserves were low. She could fight, but not forever. She knew this battle would have to end quickly, one way or another. Elias, crouched beside her, tightened his hold on his scavenged plasma rifle, adjusting the weight of the weapon in his hands. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But running was no longer an option. A shadow moved below them, then another, and then a voice. Aurea. A figure stepped forward from the darkness, his red and silver Valari armor catching the dim glow of Draxus V's dying sunlight. He moved with the slow confidence of a man who had no doubt in the outcome of this encounter, his every motion precise, calculated. His scarred face bore the smirk of a warrior who believed he had already won. Elias didn't need to ask who he was. He felt Aurea tense beside him, saw the way her fingers clenched, the slight shift in her breathing. She knew this man, and she hated him. "Zyros," she muttered, her voice cold as steel. Elias' stomach twisted. This was the traitor. Zyros studied her, his head tilting slightly as he exhaled, almost as if in disappointment. "You should be dead," he mused, his tone casual, almost amused. Aurea stepped forward, her armor humming softly as she moved. "You tried," she said flatly. Zyros chuckled. "Ah, but you always were too stubborn for your own good." His gaze drifted over to Elias, who stood beside her, rifle at the ready. "And what is this? A Terran junkrat? Really, Aurea?" He clicked his tongue. "How far you've fallen." Elias smirked, rolling his shoulders. "This junkrat is the reason she's still breathing. Maybe you should be worried about that." For the first time, Zyros' smirk faltered, his eyes flickering to Aurea's repaired armor. He understood what that meant. The biosuit, which should have been destroyed beyond repair, was functioning once more. His eyes narrowed slightly as realization set in. "So that's why the kill order wasn't confirmed," he murmured. "You let a human fix you?" His voice darkened. "Pathetic." Aurea stood her ground. "And you are nothing but a traitor." Zyros sighed, shaking his head. "You still don't see, do you? The Dominion is weak. The war should never have ended. We should have crushed the Imperium when we had the chance, not signed meaningless treaties with them." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Oh great. The war should never have ended speech. That's original." Zyros cast him a withering glare before turning back to Aurea. "The Dominion was rotting from within, and so, I took matters into my own hands. The Imperium understands power. They are willing to let us rule, as long as we eliminate the Loyalists." He gestured toward her. "People like you." Aurea's blade ignited, the energy flaring to life in her hand. "Then I will end this now." Zyros sighed again, as if bored. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he gave the order. "Kill them both." The battlefield erupted in chaos. Plasma bolts streaked through the darkness, lighting up the battlefield in bursts of neon blue and red. Aurea moved first, darting forward with inhuman speed, her blade carving through the first mercenary before they could even react. Sparks flew as she twisted, driving her knee into another warrior's chest, sending them sprawling into the dirt. Elias dropped to one knee, firing off rapid bursts from his plasma rifle, each shot aimed with scavenger precision. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to shoot. He took down two enemies before rolling behind a fallen bulkhead, narrowly avoiding a barrage of enemy fire. "Aurea, we're outnumbered here," he shouted. She didn't answer because she was already in motion, dodging, slicing, moving like a storm of death. A mercenary lunged at Elias, a vibroknife aimed for his throat. He barely had time to react. He twisted, grabbed a metal pipe from the wreckage, and slammed it across the mercenary's skull. The warrior staggered, giving Elias just enough time to fire a shot straight through their chest. Then, a blur of red armor. Zyros was moving, fast straight toward Aurea. Aurea! Elias shouted. She barely turned before Zyros' plasma blade crashed against hers, the impact sending shockwaves through the air. They clashed, a blur of red and silver, their blades sparking with every brutal strike. Zyros was strong, relentless, and merciless, his strikes heavy and unyielding. "You were always strong," he grunted, forcing her back. "But you lack vision." Aurea's blade sliced across his chest, leaving a searing wound. "And you lack honor." Zyros snarled, pivoting and landing a vicious kick to her ribs, sending her crashing into a pile of debris. Elias scrambled for his weapon, but before he could fire, Zyros was already upon him. The traitor lunged his plasma blade, aiming straight for Elias' heart. But Elias was ready. He grabbed a broken power conduit from the wreckage and jammed it straight into Zyros' chest plate. The energy discharge overloaded Zyros' systems, electricity surging through his body. He staggered, his movements faltering for the first time. And then Aurea struck. With one final, deadly movement, she drove her blade straight through his chest. Zyros gasped, his golden eyes wide with shock. "You were wrong," Aurea murmured. With a final, forceful twist of her blade, she ripped it free. Zyros collapsed, and this time he did not get back up. Elias let out a long breath. That was intense. When she pulled back, she whispered, "You are mine now, Elias Cade." Aurea glanced at him, then without warning grabbed him by the collar and kissed him. When she pulled back, she whispered, "You are mine now, Elias Cade." Elias smirked. "Well, I've had worse deals." As the sun rose over the ruined battlefield, a new beginning had already begun. As the sun rose over the ruined battlefield, a new beginning had already begun.